that the Wuhan Institute of Virology probably played a role, the US government played a role, but it is impossible to find anyone, or it has been for us anyway, to find anyone who has kind of like direct connection to any of the main players here. None of them will do an interview. None. You were the vice president of the EcoHealth Alliance. You're a former military guy, tied to the intel world. You worked at a federal nuclear lab in New Mexico for years. And then you wind up at your scientist PhD, and then you wind up working for EcoHealth Alliance in New York City. You think it's like this World Wildlife Fund operation designed to like track diseases among wildlife globally and protect the wildlife, protect the people. It's like kind of a crunchy outfit. It's do-gooders, basically. You show up there, you help them raise a bunch of money from the feds, and you become the vice president. And then you discover it's not what you thought. So that's the story that you told me at breakfast, which was an amazing story. Thank you again for coming. I'm going to bow out now and let you continue the story from there, assuming I've been faithful in my rendition of it so far.
That's perfectly accurate. And thank you for having me. This is sort of like a dream of mine.
Oh, well, I'm so excited you're here. And because this has been gnawing at me, where did COVID come from? And how was the U.S. government implicated? It clearly was, but you never meet anyone who can say that they know the players, but you do. So with that, you show up there, you become VP of EcoHealth Alliance, the now famous EcoHealth Alliance. And when did you start to realize this wasn't the World Wildlife Fund?
Shortly after I was working there. So I was hired as a senior scientist to take over what I learned after the fact, I sort of lied to, but it was a failing department that was doing predictive forecasting and analytics. And after I brought in all that money from the Department of Defense, I actually sort of saved EcoHealth Alliance. It was financially on the rocks. That $4 million really transformed the organization. And with that, and my expertise in technology, I was actually improving the systems and technology company-wide. Peter Daszak, who is the president or CEO of EcoHealth Alliance, liked everything that I was doing. He was very impressed.
Peter Daszak is like a figure out of history now. I mean, Peter Daszak is like at the very center of COVID.
Oh, absolutely. And we'll get to that. So Peter promotes me to vice president. And then I start attending executive meetings and I get involved in all the different other aspects of the company, or at least visibility to what's going on. The main driver of funding of EcoHealth Alliance was from this program called Predict. And Predict was funded by USAID to go out and conduct global surveillance of infectious diseases to predict and forecast emerging pandemics. At least that's what they were telling everyone they were going to do.
That seems like a virtuous thing to do, by the way.
No, and it seemed completely virtuous. And I had actually been doing that type of research my entire career, at least as a scientist and engineer. And I was doing that type of work at the National Laboratory. I continued that work funded by the Defense Threat Reduction Agency when I was at EcoHealth Alliance. That's where the first big check comes from for $4.6 million. And once I'm promoted and I'm looking at this USAID Predict program, I decided to go dig into the literature and all the technical reports to see what this is and how it actually works. And I read through this phone book of material, and I assess that it's a giant boondoggle. There's no way that they're going to be able to predict or forecast infectious diseases. They weren't collecting enough samples globally or in the countries where they were collecting them. They weren't collecting the data on a systematic and routine basis, which is one of the fundamental core concepts in biosurveillance. And you start to ask the question, well, what?
So this is your area. I should just say, like, you've done a lot of research into how do you model this out? Like, how do you collect the data? How do you analyze it?
I make the bold claim that I'm probably one of the world's leading experts in the area. I'm one of the few people to actually predict and forecast infectious diseases before they've occurred. And I've done it in peer-reviewed literature. And I was actually so bold when I built my models and tested them. I actually had this published in, I think it was the Guardian newspaper, the New York Post, before the outbreak hit. And this was the Zika, you remember Zika virus?
Very well, yeah.
I was working at EcoHealth Alliance, and one of the models that I developed actually forecasted the amount of Zika virus that we'd receive in the United States and where specifically. And I published that before it happened.
So you were very familiar with the technical details of a study of this kind, of monitoring of this. Like, how big is the sample have to be in order to do this?
Well, So the devil's always in the details. It depends on the characteristics of the infectious disease agent.
Of
They're
course.
talking about the population, where that population is located, the type of infrastructure. There's a lot of technical nuance because it's how healthy is the population, what is the probability that they'll be exposed to something,
Right.
and then what are the likely transmission dynamics within that population,
Right.
and does it have the ability to go from a small isolated outbreak to an epidemic to a pandemic.
So, but because this is your specific area, you look at the details of what EcoHealth Alliance, your new employer, is now doing, and it's immediately obvious to you, like instantly obvious, that this is not real.
It wasn't real. And the real crazy aspect of here is that once I'm promoted, I'm going to all these different meetings with the funders of the program. So Dr. Dennis Carroll, who was the program manager, program director at USAID, who had a very close relationship with Dr. Peter Daszak. And these fundraising events we're doing where we're telling everyone that we're going to forecast and predict these emerging infectious diseases that can cause pandemics. And I'm sitting in the audience and I'm watching my boss and these other people telling everyone that they're doing this. And like I mentioned, if you look at the technical reports, it's just very clear that this is not technically possible. So it begs the question, as me being an ethical person and a good scientist and engineer, what are we doing here?
Right, because we're not doing the thing we said we were doing.
Exactly. And, it gets sort of darker than that real quick. So once I'm sitting in these executive meetings, one of the first meetings that I sit in is a budget and forecasting meeting.
Budget, though, that's
yeah,
perfect.
it is budget, made a good Freudian slip. A budget and forecasting meeting for the company. And each vice president in charge of their area is going around talking about our budget, how our employees are doing, operations types of things, typical corporate stuff. And, I asked the question because how much money are we spending on wildlife conservation? And because when I interviewed at the company and all our branding and marketing messaging was that we're doing infectious disease research to protect wildlife and engage in conservation activities or something to that effect. And the room goes quiet. And, I'm looking at everyone and why is everyone sort of staring into space or staring at me? And eventually Peter Daszak looks at me and with sort of a maniacal laugh says, we're not doing any conservation work.
This is like a nightmare scenario.
Yeah. And I'm just shocked. And I came directly from the national laboratory system, Sandia National Laboratories, and I was trying to get away from that type of work. I was actually excited to go work at a crunchy granola nonprofit organization where I was protecting wildlife
because the Audubon Society.
Yeah, and as we were discussing earlier, we're both avid outdoorsmen. We love nature, that kind of thing. And I thought I was going to get into more of that. I was excited, like, hey, maybe I'll get a chance to have a trip out to the woods or the jungle and go protect some wildlife. And I hear this, and I'm like, okay. And I digest it. Of course, I don't say anything. It's my boss, the other executives, and then it drives more questions. Well, what are we doing here? And so I sat in more executive meetings. I learned more, and I quickly learned that we're sort of functioning as a Beltway bandit type of operation, meaning that we're trying to get large contracts and grants in our area, which is in theory predicting and forecasting infectious diseases. But really what we were doing was the simplest way of explaining it is that we were running around the planet collecting infectious disease samples to build a bank or a library of infectious diseases, which was odd. And
yes.
And it's
I'm sorry to keep laughing. This is so dark. I can't help it.
Well, it was odd from the standpoint, I was still looking at this as a scientist trying to figure out what we were doing. And there's not a ton of publication value in cataloging infectious diseases. You can get one simple publication from identifying a new or novel pathogen in a species, but it's sort of a one and done thing. It doesn't really drive future research. Right. So if you find you discover something, it's great. You found it. It's a publication, but that's not going to drive your next cycle of funding because typically you want to be very strategic about this. Well, then if you start to look at the other portfolio of research at EcoHealth Alliance and what some of my peers, other vice presidents in their areas of research, what they're up to, and the places where our employees had joint employment or co-employment with, in the work that they were doing, it became apparently obvious. We were engaging in gain-of-function research and viral discovery to make new novel pathogens. And I wanted nothing to do with it.
Well, Grand Canyon University is not like most American colleges. It focuses on the things that actually matter. It is not a ripoff. It is the real thing. It's private, affordable, Christian university located in the heart of Phoenix, one of the largest universities in the country, actually. At Grand Canyon University, education is more than academics. It is about opportunity, the chance for every student to live out the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Rights are not given by the government. They were bestowed at birth, at conception, by God. That's just a fact. And Grand Canyon University is not going to lie to your kids and claim otherwise. It tells the truth. So you're thinking, a quality education is rare, so this probably costs a fortune. Colleges constantly jack up their costs. They probably do the same. Well, they don't, actually. GCU has maintained the same tuition for 17 straight years. They're not in education to get rich at the expense of students. The whole thing is actually about learning. How refreshing. With flexible online classes, hybrid learning options, GCU offers 340 academic programs. Students benefit from a collaborative learning environment, dedicated faculty, personalized support to help them achieve their goals. The pursuit to serve is yours. Let it flourish. Find your purpose at Grand Canyon University, private, Christian, affordable. GCU.edu. So you're, rather than like predicting the threat to human and wildlife populations, you're actually just creating new deadly viruses.
Exactly. And
this is not what they advertised on LinkedIn.
No, it wasn't even LinkedIn. It was actually off their website, but you get it. The funny part is, if you look at the gain of function work and how they were even spinning it, was that they were trying to even make the argument scientifically in the peer-reviewed literature that this gain of function work that they were doing, and this was through Dr. Ralph Barrick's laboratory at the University of North Carolina, that they could model and simulate pandemic potential from the gain of function work. And that in itself is a scientific fraud, in my opinion. It's not really possible to predict how a disease will spread in the community, either animals, humans, wildlife, from looking at the genetics and doing gain of function work. But that's what the argument that they were effectively making back to the U.S. government and other sponsors of our research portfolio. In my book, I discussed this, but Dr. Anthony Fauci gets a lot of the blame for this gain of function work. And I wrote numerous whistleblower complaints. I think I wrote whistleblower complaints to every U.S. agency involved. DOD, DHS, USDA, Fish and Wildlife. It's a long list, the CIA, which we can get to in a little bit. So it's very clear that the research that we're doing had an earlier origin than Dr. Anthony Fauci. And that's really USAID and maybe the State Department formulating a relationship with the Chinese at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And if you follow the proposals or scientific proposals and technical proposals, which were submitted to the US government, and trace that back, and I have all the original documents to prove this, it looks like the path for developing the gain of function partnership with the Chinese bioweapons lab began around 2010 or 11.
What was the purpose of that relationship?
Well, at the time, I had no idea. And this is specifically, I'm talking like 2015, 2016.
Right.
Fast forward to today, I have much more information where I can sort of, I've thought about this in great detail and have had a number of other interviews. And I came to the conclusion that the real purpose actually of EcoHealth Alliance doing this gain of function research with the Wuhan Institute of Virology was for us to collect intelligence on the Chinese bioweapons lab. And, I had this very interesting moment when I worked at EcoHealth Alliance where it was around the holidays. I think it was in late 2015. I was working late to finish our project, and Dr. Dasick was working late on our project. And actually, as a coworker, working with Dr. Peter Dasick was fantastic. He was extremely hard worker, very diligent. He knew the publication game. He knew how to woo the people, the program sponsors that were funding our work. So professionally, I loved working with him in that aspect.
Smart.
Very well, I would say cunning.
Yeah.
I don't think he was much of a scientist. Actually, I think he's very weak as a scientist and engineer. But in terms of a project manager and a program manager, he was very, very strong.
Yes.
So we're leaving. We're locking up the office. We're in the vestibule up on the 15th floor of our building in New York City. And he goes, Andrew, do you mind if I ask you a question? It's my boss. Sure, Peter, go ahead.